Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm hilary.salt.
And I'm Sebastian.moore.
And we're joined today by a fantastic guest, Alka Sehgal, who's the director of Don't Divide Us and the co-author of a fantastic new report just out called The Equality Act Isn't Working. Welcome, Alka.
Thank you, Hilary. Got to say it's Sehgal Cuthbert.
I noticed
but
that.
never mind.
Do you? Shall we do it again?
Microaggression, don't worry.
Okay. Sorry. Of course, Alka, I knew you before you even had a double-barrelled name because you were in Manchester for a long time was that the 1990s? Would it be?
I think it was, yes, it was, yeah. Back in the day when my hair was not as white as it is now.
I do remember a trip to see, when it was first out, The Cook, the Thief, his wife.
Oh, the
and
Peter
her
Greenway
lover.
film.
Yeah. Do you remember going to see that? What was then the Corn House in Manchester?
Where was the Corn House?
On Oxford Road, opposite the Refuge Hotel.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, we digress.
Right, Alka, tell us a little bit about Don't Divide Us.
Okay, so Don't Divide Us started life as an open letter in The Spectator, I think, to which I was a mere signatory among several other people, many of whom are much more famous than me. But it was a letter written by several people, including my friend Claire Fox, pointing out the worries that people were having about the response to George Floyd murder or killing or whatever way you want to call it, and the subsequent protests. Now, we were coming out of lockdown at that time and children were going back to school. And most of the responses to that open letter, because an email was in that letter which people could write to, were from parents who were very baffled and worried about their children, who they had been telling for years that skin color didn't matter, coming home being told by their school that actually skin color did matter. And not only did it matter, but they really had to pay attention to it. And if their skin colors had less melanin than their more melanized friends, then they ought to be watching what they say and what they do, and making sure that they made space for their friends who it was assumed needed space to be made for them. But this kind of went, obviously, it's very contrary to the way I was brought up and the way I felt and continue to feel. And it's contrary to the way a lot of these parents felt. And they did not know, because it was so new, they never had to confront this before. It was like, how do we approach it? What do we say to the school without coming across like a rabid racist? So from that very practical problem, Zoom meetings started happening. And I think it was a large part of why I came to become director of it was because my experience has been as a teacher and in education. Plus, I'd also recently finished my PhD in philosophy and sociology of education. So I was able to put some of these things in a broader frame. And then it just kind of took off from there, really. And I suppose as we've gone on, we've broadened it more. Our scope has broadened more. We've certainly focused on education, and that continues to be a main focus of ours. And we're in touch with teachers and school governors. But it's also a more broader question of how the politics of race today in Britain are playing a significant role in corroding any possibility of social solidarity. So in that sense, it has a broader remit that probably touches more closely with some of the SDP's concerns, I'd have thought.
Yeah, it's worth saying as well that it's contrary to the way that I was raised. You know, I'm 29. I'm not that old, and yet I now say to people, well, when I was growing up, we were taught that, you know, the colour of someone's skin didn't matter. And it is weird to be now in a world, and it is very recent. I think it's the last 10 years or so where where things have sort of changed in that regard. I just wanted to read out something from your website. This is the Our Beliefs section.
Yeah.
It says, we should treat everyone as an individual worthy of respect, regardless of race, religion, or the colour of their skin. So to me, when I read that, I think, and maybe this reflects the fact that I grew up in a slightly different time, that just seems obvious, doesn't it?
Common sense.
Yeah.
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 Is it a bit bizarre being involved in an organisation where you're having to write things like that?
I never in my life imagined I would be, I have to say. Um, yes, it does. I mean, I think when all these ideas started, well, first of all, I should say I was familiar with some of these ideas theoretically through my work when I was doing my PhD. But sitting in Cambridge in a seminar room, even if the atmosphere is slightly aggressive and you're looking for the exit door, is a bit different to the real everyday experiences of mums and teachers and employees who whose experiences, when they were coming to us with their experiences, it was really horrifying. Actually, I felt really. I have not felt horrified in that way ever. I don't think, because it was like I couldn't believe that people were being told this. And I don't know if you watched the film, The School That Tried to End Racism, which
Yes.
was Channel 4's film. And that was really widely feted. It won BAFTAs. It was being talked about within the educational professional landscape as, the absolute bee's knees, the sine qua non of good practice and what every school should be getting on board with. And I literally sat there watching that with my hands over my face, sort of screaming silently, how every single day of my 25 years odd teaching experience railed against what they were trying to do in that school. It was absolutely
And
awful.
can you give us some
Separating
examples?
children. Sorry?
Sorry, can you give us some examples?
Well, they what they did was the first thing was the schools felt they had to defer to race experts, so they brought in two academics from a university, from a department, from a disciplinary area that, let's just say, is non-traditional, i.e. it's a mix and match and not very substantial intellectually. And they were invited into the school to conduct what is essentially like a social engineering experiment with the children. They wanted to measure their levels of unconscious bias from when they first did this keyboard test on a laptop, and then they conduct the experiment being in the school, and then after 2 or 3 or 4 weeks or whatever time it was, they then redo the unconscious. It was taken from the Harvard unconscious bias test, which has, that's been debunked fairly robustly anyway. So what these people are doing in a British school, trying this experiment, which involved segregating children for different lessons according to on their race color, and really encouraging the belief that there's something wrong about being white and about being British. They may not have said that explicitly, but that would definitely be the underlying message that children would be receiving. To the point where one boy was filmed crying because I can't remember the exact situation, but I think it was to do with, he was crying because he couldn't understand why he was being separated from his mates. And secondly, maybe he was crying because he felt everything about him and his family was really boring compared to what all these, non-white ethnic minority groups were, and the response to the school to the pupils and the families, which is an awful thing to do to children, I think, and
Yeah.
utterly unprofessional in my view as an educator.
So you were pushing back against those kind of ideas, and now with this report, you're pushing back against something that people might regard as a really worthy thing, the Equality Act. Do you want to give us a kind of broad outline of what your report finds? And we can go into
Yeah.
some of the perhaps cases a bit later, but perhaps give us just a broad,
Yeah. It does,
conclusion.
it does on the surface of it, at first glance, it does seem a bit weird, right? Who's against equality, right? Everybody likes equalities. It's like, but I mean, I would say that first of all, it's just worth taking a little pause and thinking, or just think of the progress that we've made in terms of, say, racism from the 60s to the 70s to the, well, not the, well, to the 90s or the 2000s. That progress has been made without the Equality Act, right? So it's worth just remembering that, and then also asking yourself, do we need a law to tell us we're equal? So I think it's sort of it's kind of moral equality, which is usually under God or some religious doctrine, or you are equal as a citizen, which involves a kind of social contract of some kind or another. Is it the job of courts and judges to tell us we're equal? But anyway, so that was those are sort of the broader questions. More specifically, the report came about really as a follow-on, logically a follow-on from our previous two reports, which had looked at the use of anti-racist third-party organisations. The first report was in local councils, and then our second report was their use in schools and what kind of ideas that they were promoting. Because people were in the media, people were talking about critical race theory, but I can assure you, most everyday normal teachers did not, or probably even still would not have heard of critical race theory or even know what it was. Yet you look at their school's equality policy or anti-racist policy, and every single idea of critical race theory is in there. So we kind of think, well, what is going on here? And we didn't see, although those reports were shining lights on important lights in particular corners, we felt that there was something really important missing as to why this was being normalized. And of course, it is a law, and it's not like the law, not like everybody wakes up in the morning and thinks, right, I must read the law, the latest piece of legislation. It doesn't work like that. However, that said, the Equality Act is so wide in its reach and so untethered to any, sort of unlimited in its scope of what it aims to do, that it really kind of encompasses everything. So we thought we really need to look. I mean, basically, once you step outside your door and you go into a shop or you go to work, the whole situation is under the jurisdiction of the Equality Act, and it will be interpreted in different ways, but that is, its regulatory force applies to nearly everywhere. So we thought we really needed to look at that more closely. And at first we just thought, I mean, honestly, we went in thinking we would find the kind of the stereotype is the judiciary is captured. It's all woke. But actually, that isn't what we found. We did not find that at all, right? But what we found was, in a way, more disturbing, I think. And we decided to look at, and you think, well, how are you going to measure? How are you going to assess the effects of the Equality Act, right? We didn't want to just do an op-ed, because there are lots of op-eds out there already, probably better than we could do. Very fine essays, legal essays, philosophical essays. We wanted to actually look at how it was working out practically. And litigation is a very good proxy for measuring that. It won't capture all the kind of interactions and all the complaints that don't make it to court, but it gives a fairly robust and a measure, consistent. You can look at it consistently, sample with which to see, well, how are employers interpreting the Equality Act, and how are employees interpreting the Equality Act, and is the consequences of this positive for the workforce, for productivity, for social relations, or not? Obviously, we found the latter, but that's.
And I think one of the big headlines that you had a few stats right at the beginning of the report that you'd pulled out, and one was that of the cases that reach tribunal hearing that involve race, only 5% are successful.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I think when you look at that number coldly, you might jump to the conclusion that that means there's lots of trivial or frivolous cases being taken that don't succeed. And I think, sorry, some of the examples that you quote in the report do show that there is some of that. I guess one of my worries about it was that the vast majority of cases don't reach a tribunal hearing. So I think there's a number, something like 75% of cases settle before they get to a hearing. And I guess I just worried that you were focusing on the 25% that reach a hearing. Now, of the 75% that don't, there is a real pressure in the tribunal system for people to settle cases, and that applies to both employers and employees. So if you're an employer and you're faced with something that, even we might all agree is a cut and dried case of overt racism that we don't want anybody to experience in the workplace or in the provision of services, in those kind of circumstances, that case would almost definitely settle. That would never reach the tribunal. So it would never fall into a number like your 5% of successful cases. And I just had a little bit of a worry that just concentrating on the cases that reach hearing perhaps gives a bit of a skewed view of actually the good that perhaps the Equality Act does in making sure that some people do get justice for what is something that I think we'd all agree we don't want to see happening.
Well, no, of course not. I mean, the starting point is you don't want people to be discriminated against for skin color, but I would question whether that would be the result of the Equality Act, right? Because, a deal that's done, I mean, also you could say, I mean, that what you've just said would apply equally to wasteful grievance cases, that they would be settled and get money for cases, simply because, for speed and getting it over with quickly. That's certainly, I've spoken to people in management positions, and that is what happens. The person, the claimant, would not have a case at all, and it would not get to court, but purely just to avoid the hassle, they'll get a payment for it, right? So
Yeah.
the point, the methodologically, we couldn't do that because the data for that, where do you go for the data?
Yeah.
How could you measure that? It's like even the official, the most official, and you would assume therefore the most consistently robust data is from the two government websites that we've used. One just gives the overall numbers and breakdowns of different employment tribunal cases on an annual basis, which we've given the main figure for. That's the over 200,000 cases since 2017, but that didn't give us a granular detail of the individual hearing cases, which are still being updated, right?
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
not even all up there, right? So our figures are a conservative estimate at that. But on the substance of your concern, like, is this going to allow people to be discriminated? I don't think so. I mean, there's no way of telling, but like I said, without the Equality Act, it would revert back to an existing Anti-Discrimination Act. And I think that would be better because the objective tests had a more important role. So it would depend on whether you think subjective experiences like microaggressions deserve to be heard in court or whether you don't. I don't think they should because they are subjective. So you
What is a
can't.
microaggression?
A microaggression, like if I just look at you like this, Sebastian, or if I mean, one of the cases is getting the name wrong, just like you did, Hilary, at the
Yeah.
beginning.
I know.
And so,
Probably. Sorry.
and so the
Now,
person,
if I were litigious and taking you to court, there would be not just the substance of that getting the name wrong. There would then be the question of, had you, as a representative of the SDP, made all the relevant records of it? Had you
Yeah.
interviewed Sebastian? Had you appointed a lead inspector to investigate the case? Were those emails? I mean, you can.
Yeah.
The horror of this is just, I mean, appalling. And my background is definitely from a left-wing politics that is would be very skeptical of employers' claims, but actually, I feel really sorry for employers now, especially as in Britain, the highest percentage of SMEs, so they're not huge corporations which can actually deal with this stuff fairly easily, as we can see with the way that some mega, McKinsey and that are kind of dropping EDI when it becomes less fashionable.
So just on the microaggressions, 'cause I'm interested in this. Would you say then that the person that is on the receiving end of those supposed aggressions, we're putting a lot of emphasis on their lived experience? I guess that's the phrase that kind of crops up again and again. So
Yes.
is that it? And then that person would say, I felt a certain way when Alka stared at me. I felt that was aggressive. Is that kind of how that might play out?
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it, Sebastian. And the mechanism by which that then sort of has a space in court is through the incorporation of harassment into the Equality Act structure, legal structure, if you like. And harassment has two components of tests. One is objective, one is subjective. Now, most of judges still, or tribunals still pay proper attention to the objective tests. However, we are seeing the incursion of the subjective test being raised more and more, being referred to more and more in a way that would undermine objectivity. So, for example, in one case, one of the judges says, it's quite explicit. Objectively, this is wrong. What the claimant is saying is wrong, but we cannot doubt the authenticity of these feelings, and therefore it's right, kind of thing. And therefore, so it then skews the judgment or the assessment of that case according to the authenticity of the feelings and the credibility of the witnesses, etc., etc. And credibility of witnesses is important, but it has to be sit alongside objective tests. So the worry is that if this isn't attended to, as more older judges leave the profession or frankly die, then you're going to get a younger generation in who will simply not be familiar or as versed with the idea of objectivity and using objective tests legally in such cases. And then you will get we are seeing a paradigm shift, I would argue, in British law. I think of it as three concentric circles of the EHRC, the Human Rights Act, and the Equality Act, all nestled within each other. And then you get individual cases or acts that sit within that, if you can picture it in your mind. And what is lost in this is a British tradition of common case law and individual citizens' rights, where you present yourself to be subjected to a law that's been agreed on nationally through national consensus and that is applied universally. So it's a real constitutional shift.
I think that was that in the earlier parts of the report, Alka. I think that was really well explained. That there's a real difference between our legal basis of our constitution and what has come from the Equality Act. Because it seems to me that the Equality Act was EU-inspired legislation that rested very much on individual rights rather than collective responsibility. And certainly in the area I used to work in pensions, there's the kind of concentration always on you must treat me as an individual meant that ways that we provided pensions that were collective, that were good for everybody, were effectively undermined by an individualistic approach to rights. And that is, I think, a real problem.
There's always a pensions angle.
There's always a pensions angle.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would just say to that, it's a bit confusing with the language, and I can't pretend to solve it, but I would say it's individual rights versus group rights, and group rights is not collective rights in the way what you've described to me I would call universal, something that is kind of and universal, not in a area, not in the kind of most general level of abstraction, but universal in terms of national norms and national legal norms and whatever norms you have in the pension business. Or I would say, whatever norms existed, they don't really exist anymore in the teaching profession, for example. That's undermined, and instead it's individual, but it's not really individual. It's really you present yourself as an individual, but the protected characteristics, you're an individual bearing disadvantage according to which protected characteristics you have.
Yeah. And I
Now
think
that's not the same as universalism.
it's
That's
not, I agree.
yeah.
And I think some of the case examples in your report kind of brought out this idea that effectively race is being weaponized as a way to, pursue effectively individual
Interest
claims.
gain. It's
Okay,
not
yeah,
it's not to do with justice. It's people
yeah.
there, some people can. I was just reading a case this morning. It's just really, I mean, unbelievable. It's a couple who worked at Waitrose. I don't know if you've read it.
I've not read this one now.
They're white, right? One's British white and one's, I think, is East European, from some East European, Bulgarian white. And they had applied for holiday and were refused holiday. And then they took time off to go house hunting and just didn't come back over that holiday period time. So they come back, they then return to work looking very tanned and sacked for gross misconduct because they hadn't given warning to the employer, etc., etc. And they've taken Waitrose to court over it, on the grounds that they were discriminated for their having tanned skin.
Oh dear. Oh dear,
I mean,
dear.
it was
Yeah,
thankfully thrown out.
yeah,
It was struck out at an early stage, so it didn't go through all the hearings. But nonetheless, you can imagine the kind it's, and I mean, you'll know this when you get, even just to get, it's quite a long process. You have to go through internal disciplinary hearings. You have to have an ACAS meeting. You have to have a particular form that's signed. You have to submit it in, and then it's heard by a tribunal to see whether it can proceed. And then even then, there are several more steps before a judgment then comes. So the whole thing can take years
yeah.
in the end.
And just on that kind of process point, the other point that kind of occurred to me reading your report was that one of the issues we have with the ET system in the UK is that there's an upper limit on what a tribunal can award in ordinary cases, contractual cases. But those limits effectively are removed if it's an equalities case.
Yeah.
And it does, I do think that many people who are taking what might look like a very straightforward contractual case
Yeah.
are encouraged by lawyers and their advisors or their trade union to throw in maybe a sex or a race angle to their case, because that does mean that the upper limit on what the tribunal can award is taken away.
Absolutely, and it also sort of affects the kind of time in which you have to have worked in a place
That's
before
right.
you can initiate a claim. That's really true. We found over 50% of the cases we looked at had were combined equality, exactly as you say, equalities and employment law claimed infringements. And you see, the thing with that is that it's so corrosive in a way you don't even realize with the act itself, because it's now on public record,
Yeah,
right? It's now on public record. It is official. Future researchers, politicians, advisors, think tanks will refer back to those records, and a case that probably had very little to do with racism in the first place is part of a recorded race discrimination case,
yeah,
irrespective of the verdict. Right. So people from Black Lives Matter and other kind of critical race inspired identitarian politics groups then can use that to say, look how much racism there is. And look, the judges didn't do anything about it. And a lot of the cases never had anything to do with racism in the first place. So
yeah,
it's really fueling a kind of weird dystopian what will I call it, understanding of our society and how it works, really, and people.
Yeah.
So if we can we step away a little bit from the legal side of things, maybe just speak more broadly about race relations? So I was asked this question when I was making a documentary in Kosovo and in Serbia, and we were in an Albanian town on the border of Kosovo, but in Serbia, where 20 years before, many thousands of Albanians had been massacred, and the race relations there are very, very tense. And they asked me, they said, well, what about Britain? Is Britain a racist country? And I just paused, because I had all of the experience of everything you get taught in the media and everything you hear about, and my actual experience. Now, clearly I'm a white person, so that will be a factor of my experience, but I just said no. It was the only answer I had for them. No, it's not a racist country. And I'm sure there's plenty of racism in the UK, but in my experience of having travelled to many parts of the world, Britain is probably the least racist country I've been in. Now, I wonder if, in many ways, most people are not racist. Most people know these things that we're espousing, the mission statement that I read out from your website, and yet we live in a sort of media landscape, an ecosystem where, certainly with social media and the rise of new media, we're hearing from the most extreme voices, because those are the ones that get traction.
Yeah.
And so on what we might call the left, but let's say the progressive wing of politics, you might hear things like the anti-racism, or so-called anti-racism, espoused by, I think there were a couple of books that were massive bestsellers in the wake of the George Floyd death. So How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge, and White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So just focusing on like that side of things for now. Do you view these people, I don't know if you've read any of these books. I've tried, and I find them...
All of them. I've read Reni Eddo-Lodge.
Oh, wow, okay. Credit to you, because I find them difficult to read. Do you think these people are acting in good faith, or do you think they're seeing a commercial opportunity?
Well, look, I mean, of the three you cited, two are American ones, and I've not read those because I think I would just kind of like feel ill, or just kind of, I'm not sure I would have the stamina to read them. The Reni Eddo-Lodge is actually very well written. It's very well written, and her reading about her educational background, if you like, you could see exactly how she's been formed, really. I think she went to Cambridge. Her main area was literature, and actually her book is well written as a literary piece. There are bits of it that are quite poetic, that are moving, but as an explanation of society, it just doesn't hold, right? It's just far too assertive. Now, what was she acting in good faith? I mean, I don't know. I couldn't say with Reni Eddo-Lodge. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think, whatever she thought she was doing when she wrote that book, I think she will have been encouraged and cultivated in that way of thinking to hold those views. Because when you said a few minutes earlier, Sebastian, because the media is completely polarized, and very extreme voices are the ones that get heard. I completely agree. But it's not just the media. People don't hold these views because it's just the media. It's because every single cultural and academic and educational institution is telling the same story, right? They may not be saying it in the screechy language of Robin DiAngelo or Ibrahim Kendi, but it will be, a primary school. Well, we're not having Easter celebrations this year because it's not very friendly. It's not very welcoming. We'll have a refugee day instead, or the girl the other day who turned up to school on the multicultural day in the uniform ginger spice dress. Those sort of little things happening.
Yeah, just expand on that in case anybody doesn't know. She turned up in a Union Union flag
That's right.
dress,
So they
right?
were having a multicultural day, and the idea was kids come in to bring in something of their culture to celebrate. And this girl came in with a Union Jack dress, similar to the one Ginger Spice wore from the Spice Girls. And her school, she was told by people at school that she was wrong to have worn that, and that her dad was phoned up to come and pick her up, and she had to leave the class and wait in the school reception area to be picked up because the culture she was representing wasn't a minority one, essentially. So what message are you going to get from that? And so the Rennie Edo Lodges of the world, who can, they're able to put forward a kind of very emotive representation of of things that I'm not going to say aren't real because I'm not white and I know that certain insults hurt than others. And so I felt pain, I felt the pain, but the question is, what do you do with that? Do you make that pain the basis of everything, the basis for your whole interpretation of the world, the basis for making claims on the society in which you live in, the basis for making claims of people you know, and kind of asserting your status on that basis as somebody who has felt pain because of skin color? I mean, to me, that is just so degraded. Every fiber of my body rebelled against that and continues to rebel because I think it's degrading. It's degrading to people of color. It's degrading to white people, I think. So I'm sorry, I haven't really answered your question. I think Robin DiAngelo is is just like a grifter. I mean, she charges loads of money and she's on the circuit. She's pretty much the worst of them all. Kendi, I haven't read. And there's the other one, Ta-Nehisi Coates, again, very poetic at times, but it's just like, really they should just stick to literature and they shouldn't try and
So
explain politics or
I
society.
picked up a copy of Ibram Kendi's book, and it was a later edition, so it's a re-release. And he's gone back and changed some of the terms and put footnotes to say that he's still on his anti-racism education and he's learning, and some of the terms might have been triggering for people, which is just amazing. But I can see that you're trying to maybe move us on to Culture Club. But I've got another question.
I was going to move us on slightly to the solutions, because I know at the end of the report you do make some recommendations. I think it would be good to talk about those. But do you do your final question first?
Maybe I'll just jump in with this first then, because I think it might link. Is that I think we've potentially had an era of progressive worldview sort of pushed on us from many different spheres. Now we're sort of seeing that Overton window shift, and I think we're seeing some really nasty stuff come from the other side.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of ethno-nationalism be very normalized. So now it's a reasonable thing in a debate to say, this land is for the white British, anybody else should get out, basically. And that sort of stuff, I think, for very good reason, is scarier in many ways. Are you concerned from that, with some of that stuff that you're seeing online?
Yes and no. Yes, it's horrible and I hate it. No, in the sense that, important as social media is, because we don't really have much of a public space anywhere else today, it is social media, and most people are not on social media. And I think it seems much more scary when you are, which I have been and will continue to be because of what I do, in situations where you're in a hall or you're in a room and people are talking about not stopping illegal immigrants or deporting illegal immigrants. They're talking about repatriation. They're talking about, deportations of people who are, already here or who have a good chance of getting citizenship here, which is obviously I'm completely against. That is just horrific. But then I have to remind myself where I am, that it isn't. It's not. But I don't want to be complacent, because the problem is that in the absence of there being a better explanation that can challenge that, that will gradually become more normalized, as you said, Sebastian, it will become more normalized. And people who today will think, no, I don't agree with that. That isn't very British. No, come on, it's will, months, years on, think just become more and more switched off and just, oh, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever, because that's what's happening now. People are like, the response to the kind of political and almost kind of like social psychological disenfranchisement of people from politics is,
Yeah. Shrug your shoulders. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Well, otherwise, who wants to have their blood pressure raised every time, and sort of burst blood vessels every time you watch the news, because it's so enraging and infuriating that you just have to kind of protect yourself, and you do it, and that's how cynicism breeds. And cynicism's probably the most harmful, probably more harmful than anything else, really, I think, for anyone that wants to see a better society for everyone.
I agree. So on the idea of a better society, would you mind just maybe outlining a couple of the recommendations that you made at the end of your report as to how we make things
Yeah,
better?
sure. Well, I will. Just before I come on to the specific ones in the report, which are narrowly with the Equality Act, I think I would just want to say, particularly, this is a nice loop back to the beginning of and your concerns about workers' rights,
Yeah.
which I share. I mean, what we have, not enough attention has been brought to this really, but we're hoping as we proceed, we will bring more to it. So I can't remember what page it's on, but we found there are real problems in the workplace, but
Yeah.
they're just not problems of racism, right? There are problems of overuse of net zero contracts, overuse of agency workers, implementing new forms of management that are meant to be egalitarian and flat rather than hierarchical. But what that means is when you have a workforce that might be multi-ethnic, temporary, constantly changing, is that nobody knows who to go to when there is a complaint to
Yeah.
nip it in the bud so things escalate. The use of technology. We have a care worker who's on his way, using their appointments for the day are texted to them in the morning. So he's on his way to one place, and then that changes, and he gets the text. The text is sent, but he doesn't receive it. Signals, whatever. He doesn't receive that text. He doesn't get paid, and he is marked as having been absent. And all these things just escalate. So, in terms of improving the workplace, the getting rid of the Equality Act might actually enable us to see the material reality of the workplace and the problems there. In terms of recommendations regarding the Act itself, I mean, we're not doing a Donald Trump saying get rid of it tomorrow. But we're saying there are certain parts of it that could be got rid of very easily, very quickly, and they should be. And that's the public sector equality duty, for sure, because that's the one that basically says it's up to judges to foster good relations, eliminate discrimination, and advance equality. And you think, well, if it's up to judges to do that, I don't need to bother. It's very disempowering and rendering us passive in discursive terms. So that needs to go. And that's the one that basically gives, free rein to any public body to do anything in the name of equity.
Yeah.
Because they'll just say, we've got to advance good relationships. And this person's saying that what you said to them has really hurt their dignity. That's not fostering good relations. So that could go. But in terms of and we have only looked at race, right? We haven't looked at the other jurisdictions, particularly disability, because I think if there's one area that possibly might merit positive action, but again, only after careful legal review of what the Act is disability. Because you have to review it, because at the minute we've got a case where intense hay fever is being put forward as a disability. All right. So clearly that's not a disability. But and then I think in that process of looking through, we will find out what protections are in the Equality Act that already exist under pre-2010 anti-discrimination legislation, which was much more tightly defined and reined in. And then what is in the Equality Act that wasn't in pre-2010 that we would like to keep? And if so, why do we want to keep it, or can we get rid of it? So that process, which should be as widely, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to have a say in it, but it should be as a public conversation at whatever
Consultation. Yeah.
levels,
Yeah.
is how you then decide, to repeal it. And, and the bits you want to keep of it, could they be put in existing legislation, or do we need to make it, proper legal experts of all political persuasions need to be set on the case. There needs to be this has not been looked at, right, since 2010. Most new legislation is meant to have post-legislative review 3 to 5 years on. And there's been no looking at it. And not only has there not been any scrutiny of it, Labour want to bring in another one, a
Yeah.
Race Equality Act. Double up on the misery. I mean, it's insane.
Agreed. So that's a really helpful recommendations as to how we make things better, I think. So, Alka, will let you have a little rest while I bring a Culture Club item, because I want to talk about the National Trust. Now, I'm sure lots of people will be aware there's been a lot of controversy about the National Trust and about the kind of idea of it being too woke. I think there was a Daily Mail headline about the National Trust secretly make all scones vegan. Now,
Daily Mail, really? I'm shocked.
Yeah, and obviously there's a wider debate around things like, lots of the curation of National Trust properties are bringing in slavery and trying to decolonise their experience. I don't really want to talk about that. I mean, that is all still going on, but I think that's a bit of an aside compared to experiencing National Trust properties. So I did want to talk about it actually from a slightly different angle, which is I spent last week at a National Trust property in Crom, which is in the north of Ireland, near Enniskillen. It's on a really massive Loch Earn, and it is a fabulous property. And we had a lovely time there. So had lots of canoeing and things like that. So there's lots of things to do there. But there was a few things that kind of came out of it that made me think about, actually, there could be a really good debate that's not just around wokery, around what the National Trust should be for. So it is in the news a bit at the moment because they are making quite a lot of redundancies. They've been hit alongside lots of other employers with the rise in employer national insurance contributions. I think they were saying it's about a £10 million cost to them for the additional employer NI. But it was clear, from my experience of Crom, is that it's clear that they already don't have enough staff to look after what is a huge estate. And it seems to me there's lots of discussions that could be had about the two things that they're trying to do, which are in tension. So one is to look after the nature and the natural environment, and I think we all really enjoying our an unspoilt environment like that. But the other is to make it attractive and enjoyable to visitors, and that does mean you need some infrastructure and you need some management. So, as an example, we had a lovely walk around the park. But you would have generally some fantastic views of the loch in a walk around the park. But because the forest estates are not managed to retain views, you don't get any view of the loch. You just get a view of trees. And, it feels to me that that's the kind of conversation about what is the National Trust for that would actually be a lot more productive than some of the conversations that are actually happening in the public sphere. Just to admit my interest here, my nephew's wife was until recently one of the rangers at Crom. And so, I've had a bit of inside information from her about some of the tensions that they are trying to manage. And it's clearly quite difficult for them to know what are the right things to do and how to manage the estate for the best in terms of trying to balance these different requirements that they are trying to juggle. So I just thought it was worth raising a debate around, shouldn't there be a more productive debate about what we want from the National Trust? Do you know how much the National Trust income is?
I have no idea.
Do you have any idea, Alka? Do you like to
No,
hazard a guess at a number?
no.
I think it's something like £700 million. It's a massive number. You know, it's bigger than some countries. So, you know, it is a really big part of our nation, and it feels like it's something where we need more of a public debate, not just about scones.
Yes. Well, hear to that for sure. What a shame we can't get a view of that.
I know.
When you're saying that, I'm thinking of the local National Trust where not here in London, but where I live in Norwich, is Sheringham Park, and that was designed by not Humphrey Jennings. He was the miner's lamp, wasn't he? Um, oh, God, Humphrey Repton, maybe. I
Okay,
think that
well
was his
done.
name. Anyway, he was of the era of Capability Brown, and it's just so beautifully landscaped. And we talk about the views. I thought I could just see the views that we do get in that, and it looks natural, but of course it is not natural at all. It was very carefully
Absolutely.
landscaped. So I
Yeah.
think maybe the National Trust needs to talk to some really good landscape gardeners.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And,
So that was my Culture Club item. Alka, I think you had one as well, didn't you?
oh, I did, but it's a bit past it now. But I'll just say it anyway. In June, I think it was June. Sly Stone died, which was a few people noted, but not many people, because he was very. He kind of burst on the flames and had a burst of flame and fame in the 60s or 70s, maybe. My favourite song is "We Are Everyday People," and and he died, but the rest of his life, the trajectory of his life was very sad after that. It was like drugs and depression and really downhill, and he kind of didn't and he kind of fell from public attention, if you like. But his music, Sly and the Family Stone's music is so joyous. It's so joyful. The form of it, the funk soul of it, and Sebastian just listened to it afterwards, and it just like We Are Ordinary People. It's such a you think often these discussions, these political discussions, and it's all so tense and angry, and you just think it's really lovely to have music unity. It's all a bit idealistic, but you need a bit of idealism, and it's nice to have it to a funky soundtrack as well, and gets you dancing and moving. And I just wanted to note his passing, really. And I think We Are Ordinary People, or We Are Everyday People, should be the theme tune of Don't Divide Us, maybe at some point. But
Well, we'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes so that everybody can have a dance around.
And if there weren't copyright issues, I'd let it play us out, but probably would get
I'm
told
not
off.
sure what the copyright situation is.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Alka. Now, we had to reschedule this, so apologies because we had earlier technical problems. Really grateful that you could make time for us. And we will put a link to the report in the show notes as well. It's a really readable report, so I would really encourage people to pick it up and have a read through it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
As normal, everybody do share, recommend and subscribe, and we will see you again later in the week.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks all.